When Zarajin Clues was 16 or 17, he had just moved into the new house with his mother and sister. He had the bedroom in the basement. About a month after moving in, he started noticing bizarre things. Hangers would sway as though there was a wind, and he often heard light, unexplainable knocks in the middle of the night. It was creepy enough to make him move all of his belongings to the spare upstairs bedroom. One day, while he played video games in the basement, a white mist shot out from behind their television, up the wall and across the ceiling. He bolted out from the basement and told his mom, who told him it was just his imagination. Over the next few months, he started hearing knocks and seeing objects move again. Slowly, it started getting stronger. Then whispers started, then painful screams. Soon it was happening every night without fail. One night he was left alone while his mother was away for business and his sister slept at a friend's. It was 1 a.m. and very little was happening, paranormally speaking. He was about to fall asleep when he heard a loud shriek of his name. He slept the rest of the night with the lights on. The next few months passed with only minor incidents, but then things really got crazy. Late one night, he was watching television in his room when his bed started shaking. At first, it was only a small tremor, so he ignored it. Then he began feeling something pulling at the covers from the foot of his bed. A cold hand grabbed his ankle and tried dragging him. He screamed, and his mom and sister came running. At that point, it was clear something very weird was going on. His mother called the people who sold them the house and told them what happened. The former owners, although offering no reason for the intrusions, had their priest come to bless the house. The occurrences never fully stopped, but they did become much less frequent and intrusive after the blessing. When I was 16 years old, babysitting was an additional source of income, and I was lucky enough to have many families in my area that needed a babysitter. A lady that babysat for quite often asked me one day if I would mind caring for her sister's baby. She mentioned that her sister had a hard time keeping a babysitter. Well, of course, I thought it was due to the child. I didn't mind at all. I quickly accepted the job, meaning more income for myself, and she was a super nice lady, however. Her husband was, well, a real jerk. He didn't want to be bothered with the baby at all, and he was always in a mood. For the most part, he was away a lot. My first day, she made a point to tell me that the house was quirky, making a lot of strange of noises and whatnot. She told me to call her if I had any problems. I thought it was strange, but dismissed it as just being because she was nervous to leave her baby with a new sitter. My first week was really uneventful. A few weird noises, but I just dismissed them. One distinctive thing that I remember about the house was that it was always dark. Even on the brightest day, it was always really dark. During the day, you still had to have the lights on, even with the curtains open. The baby, who was only 6 months old, had a cute rainbow nightlight. It was an older one that you manually had to use some force to click on and off. Once it lightened up some in the morning, I would go and turn off the nightlight. Well, morning came and I turned off the nightlight. I went out to the living room to catch up on some homework, and as soon as I got settled, the baby started screaming. I rushed into his room. He was hysterical and the nightlight was on. I know for a fact that I turned it off. It wasn't a mistake or something I thought I did. I played it in my mind over and over and over again. I know that I turned that light off. I took the baby and comforted him. I was so disoriented and scared, I didn't even try to turn it off again. I thought, if something wants it on, it can be on. I didn't tell the mother about the nightlight. Every day she would come and ask me if everything was okay. And I knew she wasn't just talking about her son. Over the next few weeks, the experiences came more and more often. Lights turning on and off, and doors closing by themselves. All of the events finally came to a peak. I was in the kitchen mixing oatmeal for the baby when from behind something tugged the bottom hem of my shirt, and hard. It was so hard that my shirt tightened around my neck. I turned around and no one was there. I screamed and ran into the living room where the baby stared at me from his high chair like I was crazy. I didn't tell his mother about this either. I don't know why I didn't tell her. Maybe I was scared that she would think I was crazy, or maybe I just didn't want to bother her with it, or maybe I was just scared since I never told anyone. Finally, she and her husband moved out of the house that fall, making their stay only 10 months. I was the only babysitter who managed to be permanent during their time. I never discussed the events that happened there. Later, I did some research on the area. It's incredibly rural and as southern as you can get. It also has a rich history in Indian tribes. While looking up the house, I discovered that during its construction, evidence of a full Indian burial site had been discovered. A couple years ago, Jabe Harrow was working the night shift and was on their way to work when they were stopped at a street light. Since there were no other cars or people around, they quickly got impatient with the waiting around. That was when they heard a knock on the passenger window. Outside stood an older man, seemingly around 60. They rolled down their window and asked if he was okay. When he didn't answer, the writer asked again, but still got no response. Finally, he asked for a ride, saying that he only needed to go a few blocks. The writer said yes and turned up the heat after he got in, noticing that the man was shivering. After they had been driving for a while, the man said his name was Henry. The driver asked once more if he was okay. Henry seemed drunk or ill. Henry sat still, saying nothing. After about 10 minutes of driving, Henry suddenly shouted, asking the driver to stop. Eerily, they were in the middle of nowhere with fields on either side. Henry climbed from the car and started walking down the street. He then suddenly stopped in the middle of the road and stood there unmoving. Slowly, they started to drive away, and looking in the rearview mirror, they saw Henry following the car. Their attention briefly shifted down because of a notification of their phone. When they looked up again, Henry was gone. They sped to work and told a coworker about the incident as soon as possible. Apparently, Henry is a regular and does this often, freaking out newcomers to the area. Strange things have been happening in Red Cody 27's house for as long as they can remember. One night they woke to the sound of someone standing just outside their room, the floor creaking under their weight. They closed their eyes and pretended to be asleep, hoping it would leave them alone. Whatever it was entered the room and stopped right beside the bed. They could feel the presence there. They cracked open their eyes, hoping to still appear asleep while stealing a glimpse at the presence. A white figure stood in front of them. At first, they wanted to call to their brother, but they were too afraid to antagonize the ghost. Eventually, their eyes closed, and when they opened them again a few minutes later, the figure was gone. Thinking their father's bedroom would be a safer place to sleep, they wrapped themselves in a blanket and made their way across the house. But when they entered the dining room, they felt as though several pairs of eyes were staring at them. They kept going until they reached the doors of the bedroom, but it was locked. Instead of going back to their room, they went into the living room and fell asleep. Around 4 in the morning, they woke again, and sitting on top of the television in the corner was the white figure. This time it was clear the figure was an elderly woman. She was somewhat blurry, and her eyes were darker than her pale body. She said their name and tried coaxing them outside. They screamed, and the figure vanished. They hid under the blanket until morning. When daylight had come, they told their story to their family. Their brother believed every word, saying he had seen the exact same figure watching him sleep. One day, T-Penning wasn't feeling well, so they stayed home from work. They were in bed, asleep on their back with a pillow over their face, when they heard their door open. They were still half asleep, so they didn't fully register the door being opened. Then they felt a pressure on their stomach, like someone was poking them with 2 or 3 fingers. They jumped and heard the sound of retreating footsteps, but the pillow was still over their head, so they couldn't see who or what it was. The footsteps sounded more like a light pitter-patter than actual human footsteps. Assuming it was their mother home from lunch break, they at first thought nothing of it. Checking their phone, they saw it was only 10 a.m., much too early for their mom to be home. As they were sitting in bed, exactly what had happened began to settle in, and they started getting really nervous. Suddenly, the door opened. They ran from their room through a different door that leads outside and called their mother. She came home and they looked through the house together. While they were looking, the door handle to a closet started to jiggle violently, freaking both of them out. That night, the two told the writer's stepfather, who at first didn't believe them. He only started to after weird things started happening all over the house. Pans flying across the kitchen, stuff randomly falling from the walls, and the new cat freaking out for no apparent reason. The house Core 21 grew up in was ancient. When they were about 8, they started seeing strange shadows and hearing voices. Their parents would dismiss the accounts as part of their imagination. Most were unsettling, but nothing was ever too scary. One night, 3 years ago, they were laying on their couch with the door open when they got the feeling that they were being watched. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't shake the feeling. Then the hairs on the back of their neck stood up, and they knew something was right behind them. They felt someone's breath on their neck, and a voice said, "We can see you." They screamed and jumped up and ran out of the room. One night, Heard was at a friend's house. She was downstairs watching a movie, and the friend was upstairs playing video games. Feeling neglected, she fell asleep despite feeling deeply uncomfortable, like she was being watched. She went back to sleep after asking her friend if he'd be coming to bed soon. When she woke again, it was to someone touching her face, saying, "Don't worry, love, I'll be down soon." She disregarded it as a dream and went back to sleep. Then she was awoken again by the same voice saying, I know, I keep using this excuse. I'm coming soon. I really do miss you." This time, she knew something wasn't right. She got out of bed and searched the entire downstairs area, but found nothing. She heard snoring upstairs and knew her friend was sound asleep. Since it was now 7 in the morning, she got ready and left for work. The next time they were together, she asked her friend if he'd been messing with her that night. He said no, but at that moment, a song came on the car radio that sounded exactly like the voice. She asked who the singer was, and he said it was his best friend's band. His best friend had been the lead singer but had committed suicide a year before. They'd lived together for a while, and most of his stuff was still in the house. It appears that at least his dead ghost friend hadn't wanted her to be alone.